What if the creature hiding in the forest wasn't a threat, but a guardian? Deep in the hills of Pine Hollow, North Carolina, where the mist clings to branches and stories travel on the wind, the Hollis family has lived for 3 generations, quietly, respectfully, at the edge of something ancient. Mara Hollis believes in silence, in harmony with the land. Her husband, Eldon, once spoke of a towering beast he saw as a boy, neither man nor animal. He called it Bigfoot. Most laughed, but their daughter, Junie, never did. From the time she could walk, Junie brought offerings, fruit, cornbread, handmade cloths, to the forest's edge. She never explained why. She only listened, waited, watched. Then one summer, a former classmate returns, with loud music, bright lights, and 30 drunken strangers. A birthday party on sacred ground. That night, the forest responds, not with roars, but with something far more unsettling. Silence, shifting air, and a shadow that shouldn't exist. This isn't a monster story. It's a story of reverence, of boundaries crossed, and of what happens when trust is broken between worlds. At the heart of it all is Junie Hollis, a quiet girl with an open heart, a fragile voice, and a connection to something older than memory. She shared with me that I've never been great with words, not the kind that fit neatly into sentences, but I remember feelings. How air tasted on the back of my tongue, how the trees breathed when nobody else was listening, how silence could be louder than any scream. That's how this story begins, not with a bang, but with the kind of quiet that creeps into your bones and stays there. My name's Junie Hollis. I was born in Pine Hollow, North Carolina, where the sky kisses the Blue Ridge and everything else tries to keep its head down. Folks around here don't talk much. They nod. They keep their fences mended and their eyes on the weather. And the woods, we don't speak of them. Not really. But we feel them. We know when something's watching, even when we pretend not to. My family's been here since before roads had names. Mama used to say we didn't just inherit land. We inherited everything that came with it. The wind, the rust, the things that don't leave footprints even when they walk beside you. And sometimes, the things that do. Daddy, Eldon, he saw one once. Said it stood on the ridge by the pond, just past where the cattails bend like they're listening. He was 11, carried that memory like a scar you never want to heal. Told me once, it wasn't an animal, Junebug. It looked at me like a man does, but sadder. Most people would call that crazy. Out here, we just call it Tuesday. I never told anybody. But I saw one too. I was 10. I'd wandered too far past the old apple tree, basket in hand, picking early blackberries for Grandma's cobbler. The air got strange. Still, like the whole world was holding its breath. That's when I saw her. Not it. Her, big as a barn door, standing dead quiet between 2 dogwoods. Her fur looked like it belonged in a storybook. Silver-touched, soft around the eyes. She didn't flinch. Neither did I. We just looked. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been seconds, could have been all of childhood in a blink. And just like that, she was gone. Since then, I started leaving things at the tree line. Apples, cornbread, bits of ribbon. Offerings, I guess. Silly, maybe, but it felt right. Like saying, I see you. I know you're there. Thank you. I never expected anything back, but sometimes the apples were gone by morning. And once, only once, there was a perfect white stone where my cornbread used to be. Mama. She never doubted. Not really. She pretended to, for Daddy's sake, but I'd catch the way her eyes lingered toward the woods after dinner. How she'd hush the radio if the dogs barked. She'd say things like, some things aren't meant to be explained, baby. just respected. I think that was her way of protecting both of us, from fear and from foolishness. People in town talk, not directly. They'll tell stories wrapped in jokes. Laughter hiding something they don't want to admit they believe. Hunters who hear breathing when they're alone. Campers who swear their tents were circled all night but found no prints. Everyone's got a tale, but mine wasn't about being afraid. It was about being seen. You ever felt that? Like someone knows you better than you know yourself. That was her. That Bigfoot woman. I don't care what science says, what TV specials spin. She looked at me like she knew my sadness before I did. That kind of recognition burns deep. As I got older, life got louder. High school, mean girls, trying to fit into jeans that never fit right, and conversations that always felt like I was speaking through glass. I had one friend once, Tessa, until she decided I wasn't enough. Turned on me, called me tree hugger, freak, you name it. And for a while, I believed her. I stopped bringing offerings. I stopped walking the woods. I tried to be normal. And it hurt, like cutting off a part of yourself to please someone who wouldn't care if you bled. Mama always knew. She didn't press, just left fresh apples on the counter sometimes. Or reminded me when the dogwoods were blooming. Subtle kindness, quiet permission. I turned 18 in April. Something shifted that spring. The sky seemed bluer, like it was remembering how to breathe. Birds came back early. Even the creek behind the barn sounded less angry. And then, Tessa came back. She knocked on our screen door like no time had passed. All smiles and hair dyed blonde. Said she was sorry. Said she'd changed. Wanted to reconnect. Maybe even throw a party out here, something big and wild to celebrate her 19th. Said it'd be 10 people max, just a few close friends. Music, snacks, nothing crazy. Mama wasn't thrilled, neither was I. But something in me, maybe the part that still wanted to be wanted, said yes. We told her no loud music, no lights pointed at the woods, and absolutely no cutting through the back field. She agreed, all sugar and dimples. But I should known better. People don't change overnight, especially not the kind who chew up kindness like candy. I found out later she'd already paid for speakers, ordered booze, invited half the senior class. She used my name to rent the gear, gave them our land address, told the caterer to just show up and let it happen. By the time I found the receipt tucked under her jacket on the porch swing, it was too late. The damage was done. I walked out to the edge of the woods that night. The sky was full of hush. No frogs, no owls, just the sound of something waiting. I knelt down where the apple tree leans, set a small cloth with 2 slices of honey cornbread, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to let them in. I should have known. I don't know if she was there, but the air grew heavy, like rain before it falls, and I swear, just as I turned to leave, I heard a twig snap. Slow, purposeful, not threatening, just present. Sometimes you don't need to see something to know it heard you. And that was the last quiet night Pine Hollow would know for a long while. And deep in my gut, I could feel it. Something ancient had stirred, not out of anger, but because it remembered me. It started with a message, not a letter, not a call, just a soft ping on my phone one Sunday morning, while I was pouring sugar into my coffee. I hadn't heard from Tessa in almost 3 years. Last time we spoke, I was crying behind the gym, holding the torn strap of my backpack while she laughed with her friends. I swore I'd never speak to her again, and yet, there it was. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. Want to catch up?" The words hit me like a strange kind of heat, not fire. More like standing too close to something you should stay away from. I stared at that message until my coffee went cold. Then, for reasons I still can't explain, I said yes. She looked different, blonder, like she'd dipped herself in someone else's life. She wore this easy smile like it had always belonged to her, like she'd never been the girl who spit in my shoes or whispered freak loud enough for everyone to hear. I waited for the snark, the edge, the little bite I'd known so well. But she didn't bring it. Just a hug, just a laugh. Said she missed the old days and hoped we could start over. My body didn't trust her, but my heart wanted something, anything, to feel normal again. I was tired of being the girl with too many silences and no Friday plans. Tired of talking to trees. Tired of wondering if that creature in the woods still remembered me. So I let Tessa in. We talked on the porch that whole afternoon. She was charming in a way that made you forget to keep your guard up. She said she was throwing a birthday party soon. 19 years old, she said, and she wanted something different. Special, something wild. Then she paused, tilted her head just enough to seem thoughtful, said something like, "What if we had it here? Your place. It's perfect. Open space. No nosy neighbors. And it's got that spooky, magical vibe. You know?" I laughed. I thought she was kidding, but she wasn't. I told her Mama would say no. That Daddy didn't like strangers on our land, that we kept this place quiet for a reason. Tessa promised it'd just be a few close friends. 10, tops. No loud music, no booze. Just a chill night under the stars, she said. Her words were syrup, sweet, slow, sticky. I wanted to believe her. I brought it up to Mama that night while she was slicing apples for a pie. She stopped, mid-cut, and gave me that look. The one where her mouth stays still, but her eyes ask 100 questions. "Junie," she said, "you sure this girl's changed?" I wasn't, but I said I was. Because I needed her to say yes. Because part of me still believed people could come back better. Because I didn't want to be the bitter one anymore. Mama sighed. One night, no lights near the wood. No disrespect in this land. You hear? I heard. And I told Tessa the rules. She smiled wide, kissed my cheek like we were sisters, and swore up and down she'd follow every word. That's when the lies started slipping through, little ones at first. She asked if I'd mind helping book a food truck. Said her cousin had one lined up but needed a deposit. I offered $50. She said that wasn't enough, needed more. I didn't tell Mama. I took cash from my graduation stash and handed it over. Then came the speaker rental. Then the folding chairs. Then the inflatable screen she said would look so dope against the trees. Each time, I told myself it was fine. That she'd pay me back. That this was still the same small party she'd promised. But the guest list grew. I saw it happen in real time. Snapchats, Instagram tags. Kids at the diner whispering about the wild bash at the Hollis place. I confronted her. She played dumb, said people were assuming things, that she never invited more than a dozen. She smiled too easily. That's how I knew she was lying. Still, I didn't stop it. Something in me froze. Maybe it was shame. Maybe I was scared that saying no would mean losing the only piece of social warmth I'd touched in months. Maybe I just wanted to be part of something, even if it was wrong. The night before the party, I found the receipt tucked under her hoodie on the porch swing. Speaker system, 800 watts. Guest count, 45. Food order, BBQ for 50 heads. She hadn't even tried to hide it. I sat there in the dark, staring at the ink. My hands were shaking. The fireflies blinked out in the field like they were holding their breath. A sick feeling settled in my stomach, thick and hard like unbaked bread. I didn't tell Mama. She and Daddy had to take Grandma to the ER that night. She PB'd again. Her wheezing had gotten worse. I stayed behind. Promised I'd keep the house quiet. Promised I'd make sure the party didn't get out of hand. But I was lying too. There was this hum inside me, a buzzing like my ribs were made of bees. I knew what was coming. I knew it couldn't be stopped. Still, I wanted to believe something might shift. That she'd call it off. That the forest would forgive me one more time. Instead, I stood alone by the edge of the barn, watching a truck unload metal stands and crates of alcohol. Watching strangers walk across our soil like it belonged to them. Watching string lights blink like false stars against a sky too tired to argue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to walk into the woods and disappear. But I didn't. I just stood there, and something in the trees, something quiet, something large, watched me back. Not angry, not cruel, just waiting. And somewhere deep in the hollows of those woods, I could feel the stillness gathering. Like the land itself was listening, like it already knew what would happen next. I waited until the last porch light in the house went dark. I could still hear the distant hum of the highway far off in the valley, but out here, the night pressed in like thick wool. Soft, heavy, and absolute. I pulled on Daddy's old flannel and slipped out barefoot, the wooden floorboards creaking just enough to make me wince. I didn't bring a flashlight. Didn't need one. The moon was full and high, hanging like a silver coin above the tree line, lighting the fields in a pale hush. I knew the path by heart. Every stone, every soft patch of grass, every place the earth sighed when you stepped on it. I passed the old sycamore, the one with the hollow belly that once hid a family of raccoons. I passed the cattle fence, long since broken and swallowed by tall weeds. I passed the rusted tractor, its silhouette hunched like a sleeping animal. My hands were cold, but I didn't notice. Not really. All I could feel was the drumbeat of my ribs. That sound you carry when you're about to confess something no one taught you how to say. The tree line greeted me like it always did, dark and still, but never cruel. The woods weren't scary, not to me. Not the ones that had held my secrets since I was 10 years old. I stopped just before the thicket and knelt down beside the crooked stone where I used to leave apples. It was the same spot. The moss had grown thicker, the dirt colder, but it hadn't forgotten me. I pulled a paper napkin from my jacket pocket and laid it on the ground. 2 slices of cornbread, fresh from Mama's cast iron, wrapped in wax paper, and an apple, red and perfect. I set them down gently like I was placing them on an altar. Maybe I was. And then I sat back, cross-legged, palms on my knees, breathing like I used to when I needed to make my world small again. The air was sharp with pine. I could smell wet leaves and the faint whisper of something sweet, like honeysuckle clinging to memory. I didn't expect a reply, but I spoke anyway. I told the dark what I hadn't told anyone, that I was tired of pretending Tessa's smile meant anything. That I hated how I'd given in. That I felt like a coward wearing someone else's kindness, trying to believe it fit. That I was angry, not just at her, but at myself, for wanting so badly to belong that I let her take this place, this land, this sanctuary, and turn it into a joke. My voice cracked halfway through. The kind of break you can't swallow. I kept talking. About Mama. About Daddy. About the way Grandma's breath sounded like leaves in a storm. About the shame that came with knowing you'd betrayed something sacred, not with malice, but with silence. I don't know how long I sat there. Time went strange. The kind of strange where you forget you're part of it. And then I felt it. A presence. Heavy. Quiet. Like gravity had changed just for me. I didn't look up at first. I couldn't. My body went still, not from fear, but from something deeper. Reverence, maybe. Like being in a church with no ceiling. The sound of something breathing. Not ragged, not close, but large. Deep in the trees. Watching. My fingers curled into the soil. I closed my eyes. Let it wash over me. The sound of a footstep. Bare, deliberate, landed somewhere to my right. Not rushing, not threatening. Just there. I opened my eyes slowly, and I saw her. She stood between the trunks, half shadow, half moonlight, taller than I remembered, or maybe I was just smaller now. Her fur shimmered silver gray, not dull, but soft, like winter dusk. Her eyes were wide, dark, not empty, but full of something I couldn't name. Something that felt like knowing. She didn't move. Neither did I. She didn't blink. I forgot how. The air between us held everything. Guilt, gratitude, The kind of apology you can't put into words because you don't deserve to. I didn't speak. Not this time. I just sat there, still as the stones beneath me, and let her see all of me. The girl who used to believe. The girl who forgot. The girl trying to remember. She shifted her weight slightly. Not toward me. Not away. Just enough to let me know she was real. That she was choosing to stay. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't joy. It was something heavier, softer, like forgiveness wearing a coat made of silence. And then, just as gently as she had come, she turned. No rush, no sound. Just one step deeper into the dark, and then another. Her body disappeared into the trees like smoke being called home. I stayed there long after the moon had drifted higher. Long after the wind picked up and the night grew colder. My legs had gone numb. My hands were raw from the cold. But none of it mattered, because something had changed. Not out there. Not in the woods. In me. When I finally stood up, I looked down at the spot where the offerings lay. They hadn't moved. Not yet. But I didn't need them to. She had listened, and I knew, somewhere in the quiet marrow of me, that when morning came, they would be gone. Taken with the same care I'd left them, I walked back to the house with bare feet, and a heart that felt heavier in the best way. The windows were still dark, the porch still creaked. Nothing had shifted, but everything had changed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind brush against the windows like fingers against old glass, and I understood something I hadn't before. The woods don't need to speak. They already know who you are. The morning of the party started too quiet. Even the birds seemed to know something was wrong. The wind held back like it was listening, and the sun didn't rise the way it usually did over Pine Hollow. It just sort of crept, low and slow, like it was unsure whether it was supposed to show up today. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted more like metal than comfort. Daddy was in the next room, pacing. Mama hadn't said much since she got the call from the hospital. Grandma's lungs were acting up again. Another flare. Another trip to same routine, different Sunday. She looked at me from across the room, her eyes soft but stern, the way only Mama's eyes can be. "You sure you'll be okay here by yourself?" she asked. I nodded. I lied. It's just a small thing. I'll keep it under control." She looked like she wanted to press me, but the clock was ticking, and Grandma needed oxygen more than I needed another scolding. So she kissed my forehead, grabbed her coat, and left with Daddy in the truck, tires crunching gravel like a warning. That was around 3 p.m. By 4:15. The first car pulled in. It was an old Jeep with speakers already blasting some kind of synthy, bass-heavy nonsense that didn't belong anywhere near this land. I stepped out onto the porch and waved the guy down. Told him to cut the music. He gave me a lazy thumbs up and didn't. Another car followed. Then another. By 5 o'clock, our driveway looked like a parking lot at a fairgrounds. Tessa didn't even show up until after 6. She arrived like nothing was wrong. Hair curled, boots high. Laughing like this was exactly how she'd planned it all. She jumped out of her car with a case of White Claw under one arm and shouted, "All ready to party or what?" Like she was on stage. I walked up to her. "Tessa, this wasn't the deal." She blinked, cocked her head. "Relax, Junie. It's just a little crowd." I looked around. There were at least 30 people by then. Some dragging coolers, others stringing lights between the trees like this was their backyard. I saw a girl stumble while carrying a fold-out table. She knocked over one of Mama's planters. Didn't even notice. Tessa tossed me a smile like a coin. Let loose a little. "You'll thank me later." I didn't thank her. I went back inside and stood at the window for a long time, watching our yard get swallowed by noise. A full DJ setup had appeared out of nowhere. They ran an extension cord from the barn, and someone actually drilled into the old wood siding to mount a floodlight. Music poured out, too loud, too bright, too much. By 8:30, the field was packed. People spilling beer, people vaping in the rose garden. Someone hung a hammock between two dogwoods and laughed when it ripped loose. They built a fire pit near the sycamore. Stacked logs without asking, without checking the dry grass. Sparks popped high into the air like little red warnings. And I just stood there. Some part of me was screaming to stop it, to call Mama, to shut it all down, but the other part, the one that had been bullied, abandoned, made small by girls like Tessa, that part said, "You asked for this, you let it happen. You deserve whatever comes next." So I watched it all unfold like a bad dream I'd seen coming for miles. Then someone started shouting. It was a deep, ugly kind of laugh. The kind that's too close to a howl. I turned and saw a guy holding a bottle of whiskey, trying to climb onto the roof of Daddy's shed like it was a jungle gym. He slipped, landed hard, and groaned. Everyone laughed. The music got louder. By 10, the lights were flickering like they knew they didn't belong here. One of the speakers blew out with a sharp pop, and for a second, just a second, it was quiet. That's when I felt it. That's when I felt it. The change, the kind that creeps in sideways. The music kicked back in, but something underneath it had shifted. I walked back to the edge of the porch, my hands gripping the railing tight. The woods were darker than usual, too still, like every tree had decided to hold its breath at the same time. I turned my eyes toward the big tent they'd set up, right in the middle of the back pasture, the spot I used to leave my offerings. The place she once stood, they didn't know, they didn't care, and now they were trampling it under drunken feet. I stepped down from the porch, my boots crunching the gravel, and walked slowly toward the chaos. I didn't know what I was going to do. Maybe yell, maybe rip the cord out of the speaker, maybe cry, maybe run. But I didn't have to choose, because something else chose first. A noise rose up from the trees. Not loud, not animal. It sounded like branches snapping in rhythm, like something walking, big, deliberate, and close. At first, nobody noticed. But then the fire in the pit flared, too high, too fast, and sparks sprayed like a warning shot. And then it started, a sharp geet thud, like something hitting canvas. Another. Then an apple rolled across the ground, not a fresh one. Rotten, blackened. Smelled like vinegar and earth. People screamed. One girl tripped over a cooler. Another ducked as a handful of wet leaves splattered across the table. Cans flew. Mud splashed. Something big moved just outside the lights, fast and low and wide. The tent collapsed in on itself like a wounded animal. Somebody yelled, "What the hell was that?" Then panic. People running, shrimping, swearing, flashlights darting like scared eyes. Tessa screamed my name once, high and sharp, and I saw her bolt for her car. Tires spun out in the gravel. Someone backed into the hydrangeas. And then it was just me, standing in the middle of my family's yard, among crushed cans, broken glass, overturned chairs. And the woods weren't silent anymore. They were breathing, watching, and somewhere, in the blur of light and shadow, I swear I saw her again. Just for a second. Her eyes catching the floodlight before it died. Not angry, not afraid, just disappointed. Like she knew I'd failed her. But she'd come anyway. I stood there, trembling, as the night took back what didn't belong. And behind me the porch light flickered once, then went out. I don't remember the exact second the fear hit. It wasn't sudden. It crept up slow, like fog rising off the pond before sunrise. One minute I was standing in the wreckage of the party, broken lawn chairs and beer cans at my feet, the smell of burnt plastic still hanging in the air. The next minute, I realized I wasn't alone. Not truly. Not the way we think of it. The silence had teeth. It was the kind that presses against your ribs, makes your breath go shallow without you knowing why. I could feel the woods watching. I'd felt it before, years ago, but this time was different. This wasn't curiosity, it was warning. I took a few steps toward the edge of the clearing, where the trees swallowed up the moonlight. The fire was out. The lights were gone. I couldn't hear music anymore, couldn't hear the sound of tires on gravel or laughter or even footsteps. They'd all run, fled like rabbits scattered into the dark without looking back. Good instincts, maybe, but not mine. Mine kept me frozen. There was a rustle, low and wide, like something brushing against tall grass. I turned toward it. Nothing. Just a stretch of shadow where the orchard used to be. Then came the first sound. It wasn't loud, but it cut through me all the same. A soft, wet splat against the side of the tent's frame. What was left of it? Sagging and half collapsed under its own weight. I turned just in time to see a rotten apple roll slowly across the grass, wobbling, leaving a smear behind like paint. Another one followed. Then a third. Each one dropped from above, or maybe thrown. Hard to tell. The trees were too thick, too dark. A branch snapped. Not small. The kind that breaks under something heavy. I stepped back. Another apple hit the folding table near the snack spread. It burst open on impact, juices flying in all directions, mixing with spilled soda and sticky beer. The air turned sour. It smelled like compost and panic. Then the mud came. Not a sprinkle. Not a splash. A full handful of it, slung through the air with enough force to slap against the DJ booth and slide down the side in a slow, thick line. It was black and cold and full of leaves. Another hit the top roof above me, then slid down like a greasy tear. There was no wind, no movement I could track, just presence. Then came the breath. Not mine. Not human. It was close, so close I felt it on the back of my neck before I heard it. A deep, slow exhale that stirred the hairs on my skin. Not threatening, but clear. It was letting me know. It had arrived. I turned. Nothing. Just the tree line, still and deep, and then movement. A figure shifted in the dark, stepping just barely into the edge of the moonlight. It wasn't fully visible. Just enough to steal your breath. Broad shoulders, bent knees, arms longer than any man's, covered in thick fur, darker than the night behind it. But it didn't lurch forward. It didn't growl or roar. It stood there, watching, like it was waiting. More rustling this time to my left. I swung around. Another shape moved between two oaks. I couldn't see its face, just the mass. The weight of it. The way it moved. Fluid, but grounded. Not like an animal. Like something old. Like something that belonged here far more than I ever did. Something heavy dropped to the grass near me. I flinched. It was a stick. Then another. Then more. Falling from above, from the trees. Not big enough to hurt, but sharp, precise, meant to rattle. I got the message. This wasn't attention. This was an intention. I stepped backward, slow, careful not to trip. My hands were shaking. I didn't try to call out. I didn't try to run. Somehow I knew that would be worse. I just moved, inch by inch, until I crossed the edge of the fire pit and reached the porch steps. The second I touched the wood, the air shifted. The pressure eased. Whatever was out there, it let go. But not without a final gesture. Just before I turned to head inside, I saw it. Her, I'm sure of it. The one I'd seen as a child. She stood near the far corner of the barn, half hidden behind the old rain barrel. Her eyes caught what little light remained and reflected it back at me. Not with malice, not even judgment, just something heavy, like disappointment braided with protection. I dropped my gaze. The door creaked as I opened it. The house smelled like coffee grounds and lavender soap. Familiar. Safe. But I didn't feel safe. I leaned against the wall and slid down until I was sitting on the hardwood. Legs pulled in. Hands gripping the edge of my sleeves. My heart was hammering, but my breath was steady. Something had happened. Not a warning. A correction. A line had been crossed. And they'd stepped in. Not to punish, but to contain. That thought stayed with me all night. I didn't sleep. Just sat there, lights off, watching shadows shift through the windows as the world outside settled again. Around 3 a.m., I heard one last sound, distant but clear. The snap of a branch, the groan of something heavy returning to the woods. Then, nothing. When Mama and Daddy got home after sunrise, they found the place trashed. Furniture overturned, trash scattered everywhere. The lawn looked like it had been hit by a storm. Mama stepped out of the truck and just froze. Daddy muttered something low under his breath. They didn't ask the obvious question. They just looked at me, and I said the only thing I could. They're gone. Mama nodded. And from the porch, as she looked toward the tree line, she said real quiet, they were listening, and deep down, I knew. They always had been. By morning, it was all just wreckage. I stepped outside before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, barefoot on dew-wet boards, eyes still swollen from a night with no sleep. The air smelled like smoke, stale beer, and scorched plastic, blended with the earthy weight of crushed grass and something older. Something wild. The field was quiet now, but it wore the memory of chaos like a scar that hadn't scabbed over yet. Plastic cups floated in the trough like forgotten boats. Folding chairs lay twisted in the garden bed Mama had spent all spring planting. The tent, torn down the middle like it had been clawed from above. One of the speakers was cracked open like a fruit, wires spilling out in tangled knots. My boots found the trail of muddy footprints near the barn. None of them mine. Some too big, some too wide. I was still standing there when the sheriff pulled up. Deputy Wills was the one who stepped out. He's lived here his whole life. Taught Sunday school with Daddy once, long ago. His belt squeaked when he walked. He tipped his hat before he said anything, taking in the mess with a long exhale. He didn't look surprised. Just tired. Got a couple complaints from the neighbors, he said, though everyone knows the nearest neighbor's a good half-mile off. Loud music, screaming. One gal said she saw a man chasing people with mud on his face and a rake in his hands. He looked at me, waiting. I shrugged. Party got out of hand. He stared at the busted light rig, the overturned fire pit, the half-eaten sandwich stuck to the barn wall like some kind of weird protest. I'd say. He didn't ask who hosted it. Didn't ask where the girl who started it had gone. Probably knew better than to expect answers this early. He walked the perimeter for a bit. Checked the tent. Nudged a pile of branches with his boot. Then he glanced toward the woods. Just once. And said, "These hills have a way of taking care of their own, don't they?" I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. He left soon after. Told me to give Mama his best. And reminded me to file a damage report if anything was stolen. Stolen? That word stuck with me. Like anything here had ever really belonged to us in the first place. By mid-morning, the cleanup started. I picked up shattered beer bottles with shaking hands, wrapped sharp bits in old towels. The sun was warm, but I was cold. Daddy helped drag the busted speaker to the burn pile. Mama swept the porch even though it didn't need sweeping, just to keep herself moving. None of us said much. Not until I found Tessa's bracelet near the edge of the field, her name on a tiny gold plate, snapped in two like a warning. I put it in my pocket and didn't tell anyone. Later, Mama asked how bad it had gotten. I told her the truth, or enough of it. Told her people showed up drunk, broke things, crossed lines, told her Tessa left before it got real bad, that no one got hurt. But I left out the part where the woods rose up and swallowed the noise. I left out the breath on my neck. The figures just past the light. The way the trees felt like they were holding back. I didn't think she needed to hear that part. She paused, like she was thinking of how to respond. Then just said, "They don't like being disrespected." Not after all these years. That night, we left an offering. A simple one. Cornbread, a jar of honey, and a folded cloth laid at the edge of the tree line. Mama whispered something I couldn't hear, and Daddy set a candle on the stump, even though the wind made it flicker and die before we made it back to the porch. We didn't expect anything. But the next morning, everything was gone. The plate, the cloth, even the candle stub. What was left were the prints. 3 sets, all large, all deep in the earth. One set had toes splayed wider than my hand. The second was broader, heavier, with a heel that left a slight divot in the moss. But it was the third that made my breath catch. Smaller, lighter, like a child's. But wrong? Too long, too narrow. And I knew. They hadn't come alone. Later that afternoon, the equipment rental guy showed up with a clipboard and a tired look. He whistled low when he saw the state of the gear. "Damn," he muttered, crouching by the shattered amp. "Never seen one blowout like this. Not even at that New Year's bonfire down in Marion." He rubbed the back of his neck, then looked at me. "Folks get rowdy." I didn't answer. He looked toward the woods, squinting like he was trying to see something too far off. "Place has a feel to it," he said quietly. "Like it's older than the trees. You know what I mean?" I nodded, because I did. He didn't charge us for the full damage. Said he'd write it up as weather-related. "Wind gets wild up here," he said with a crooked smile. "Yeah, wind." The next day, Tessa texted me. No apology, no explanation. Just, "I left my jacket at your place. Can you drop it at school?" I stared at that message until the screen went dim. Then I deleted it. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She wouldn't come back. Not here. And if she did, I don't think the woods would let her in. Later that evening, I sat with Mama on the porch. The sun was bleeding orange over the trees, and the air smelled like soil and sweet clover. She held her coffee like it was keeping her grounded. "You did right," she said. I didn't feel like I had, but I nodded anyway. She looked toward the trees. They didn't come unless they need to. I followed her gaze. The forest was still, but I could feel it, that weight, that watchfulness, like a promise unspoken. And somewhere deep in that hush, I swore I heard breath. Not angry, not afraid, just aware. And for the first time in days, I felt seen again, not judged. Just remembered, like they hadn't given up on me. Not yet. It felt like the air had changed. Not in the way it does when seasons shift or when storms roll in, but deeper than that. Like the land itself had exhaled. Like something had been lifted or accepted. I couldn't quite tell which. I just knew the house didn't feel heavy anymore. The porch steps didn't creak the same. The silence didn't carry the same weight. That morning, I walked barefoot to the tree line. Mama watched me from the porch with her mug tucked between her palms. But she didn't say anything. Didn't need to. She knew where I was going. Maybe she knew why. Maybe she'd already done it in her own way years ago. The basket I carried wasn't fancy. Just a little woven one we used for eggs sometimes, lined with an old tea towel. Inside it, I laid out slices of sweet cornbread from Mama's skillet, a few apples that weren't too bruised, and a small mason jar of the blackberry jam we only cracked open on special days. I added a folded napkin and a tiny crocheted square I'd made back when I was still learning with Grandma. The colors didn't match, but it felt right. I reached the mossy spot by the stump, the one I'd always used. It hadn't changed. Even after everything, the woods still felt like they recognized me. I knelt, placed the basket carefully, and rested my hand on the damp ground. It was cool, but steady, and I whispered, real low, "Thank you." I didn't explain, Some things don't need words. The forest listened in its own way. Later that day, I didn't mention what I'd done. Neither did Mama. But around noon, the wind changed direction and brought with it a smell I hadn't noticed in weeks. Pine sap and riverstone, fresh and wild. And in that scent, I felt something move. That night, we sat on the porch again, not talking much. The fireflies came back early. One even landed on my wrist, blinking slow and steady like it had something to say. Around 10 p.m., I snuck back out. I don't know what I expected. A clean basket? A new trinket in return? I don't know. But when I reached the stump, the basket was gone. Not picked through, not scattered. Gone. All that remained were the prints. Not many, just a few. But they were clear, even in the half-light. One was large, broader than my foot, sunk deep into the earth like whoever made it had weight and stillness behind every step. The second was a bit smaller, maybe half the size, but just as long, almost delicate. I stared at that one the longest. It hadn't been there before. There were only 2 sets. But they went in the same direction. Away. Back into the woods. Back home. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the underbrush, swallowed by brambles and moonlight. I didn't hear a sound, but I felt it. That same presence from the night of the party, only softer now. Less like a warning, more like a nod. I stood there for a while. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. Just stood. The next morning, Daddy found one of the broken lawn chairs moved to the edge of the tree line, folded neatly, upright. It hadn't been there the day before. He brought it back up to the barn and didn't say a word. The rental company came later. The guy in charge, same one from before, looked around and shook his head slow. I don't know what y'all did to this place, but, feels different now. He handed Mama the invoice. No charges for the damage. Wasn't your fault, he said. Wasn't your fault, he said. Honestly, might have been the best thing to happen to some of these kids. I asked what he meant. He scratched his jaw and said, one of the boys who came out here that night told me don't drink no more. Says something in the woods made him feel small. Not scared. Just seen. Told me he hasn't slept like that in years. Then he laughed, shook his head and left. The story spread quick, like stories do in towns like ours. People started saying a bear wandered into the party. Or a mountain lion. Or maybe some old hermit who didn't like kids on his land. But nobody really believed any of that. They just needed a story to hold on to. Something that made sense. Something that fit inside the world they understood. But I knew. Mama knew. That night, as we cleared the dinner table, I told her, I think they forgave us. She paused with a dish in her hand. Didn't look at me. Just nodded. I think they never blamed you to begin with. I thought about that for a long time. That sometimes we carry shame for things we didn't mean to break. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to set it down gently, like a basket at the edge of the woods, and walk away trusting it'll be understood. A week later, I found the crocheted square from my offering, tucked into the windowsill on the barn's backside, where no one goes. Folded clean, like it had been cared for, and underneath it, a stone, perfectly smooth, pure white, round, but not shaped by a river. Placed, deliberate. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, breathing slow, until the sun dipped low and the crickets started humming again. And I swear, just before I turned to go, I heard something shift in the brush, not close, but not far. And the feeling that followed? It wasn't fear. It was a kind of knowing, a quiet promise, that some things stay with you, even when they leave no trace behind. Somewhere between dusk and dark, the woods became a mirror, not just a place. Not just a backdrop, but a reflection of everything we'd done, and everything we were still too afraid to admit. That last week, before I left Pine Hollow for school, I kept finding myself standing at the edge of the field, not going in, not calling out, just standing, Like, maybe if I was quiet enough long enough, something would whisper back. But it never did. And I think that was the answer. The strange thing is, peace never comes loud. It doesn't ring or slam or cry. It settles, creeps in slow, seeps through cracks you didn't know you had. One morning, I woke up and realized I didn't feel watched anymore. And I didn't feel watched anymore. And I didn't feel alone either. It was something else entirely. The weight that had clung to the trees, the silence that had pressed into our walls. It was gone. Not erased, not forgotten, just fulfilled. The party had been over for weeks, but Mama still found pieces of it hidden under shrubs and tucked behind the fence posts. Candy wrappers half dissolved by rain. A sneaker that no one came back for. Every time we found something new, she'd look at me like she was asking a question without saying it. And I'd nod like I knew the answer. But really, all I knew was this. Something bigger than us had drawn a line that night. Not to hurt, not even to scare. Just to remind us that this land wasn't just dirt and trees. It remembered. It forgave. But it didn't forget. One evening, Daddy and I went to patch the side of the barn, where the speaker mount had torn off the siding. We were quiet most of the time, him holding the wood steady while I hammered the nails in. About halfway through, he said, "You think she's still out there?" I didn't ask who he meant. I just said, "Yeah." He nodded, wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, "That's good." We didn't talk more than that, but he whistled the whole way back to the porch. Same tune he used to hum when Hen rocked me to sleep when I was little. It was the next morning that I saw it. Out by the creek, just past the dogwoods, a single white feather stuck upright in the soil, like someone had planted it. Not long, not loose, pressed, held. I stood there for what felt like hours. The water rushing over stones. The wind lifting just enough to tease the hem of my jeans. The feather didn't move. I didn't touch it. I just whispered, "Thank you." Again. Not expecting anything back. Just offering it. Like a final thread in something too old and too sacred to ever name. That evening, I finally opened the old shoebox under my bed. The one filled with photos and notes from high school. I went through them, one by one. Smiles that didn't mean anything. Faces that no longer fit the shape of my world. I threw most of them out. Kept only two. One of me and Mama, arms around each other, laughing in front of the hay bales. And one of the woods, taken years ago when the trees had been dusted in frost, and the creek ran slow and glassy. I tucked both into the journal I'd started keeping since that night. Just notes. Little things. How the wind shifted. What the animals did. What the sky smelled like when it started raining on warm soil. Nothing anyone else would care about, but it mattered to me. Because when I looked back at those pages, I could see the shift. Not just outside. In me. The girl who used to leave apples and cornbread without knowing why had grown into someone who understood that silence isn't emptiness. It's language. It's memory. And sometimes, the best way to honor what watches us is to keep watching back. 2 nights before I left for college, Mama made a roast. And Daddy lit the fire pit in the backyard even though the air was humid and thick with mosquitoes. We sat out under the stars. Just the 3 of us, like it was any other summer evening. But it wasn't. I knew it. They knew it. And so did the woods. I looked out across the field once more, half expecting to see something shift between the tree trunks. A shadow, a glint, a shape too big to explain. But there was nothing, and I understood. She wasn't coming back. Because she didn't need to. The work was done. The message had been received, and now it was mine to carry forward. When we went inside, I lingered by the screen door, listened to the frogs down by the water. Watched the fireflies blink lazy patterns through the grass. I whispered again, like a prayer this time, softer than breath. I won't forget, and I haven't, even now. Miles away from Pine Hollow, the woods still live in me, in quiet ways. In the way I stop to listen when everything else is moving too fast. In the way I pause before I enter a space that isn't mine. In the way I remember that just because something doesn't speak, doesn't mean it doesn't know. I don't talk about it much. Not because I'm afraid no one will believe me, but because I know they wouldn't understand. Not really. Not unless they'd felt it too. But that's okay. Because some stories aren't meant to be proven. They're meant to be carried. Carefully. With respect. Like a feather in the dirt. Like an offering on a stump. Like breath in the dark. Waiting for the world to quiet down long enough to hear it. And now that you've heard mine, maybe you'll start listening too. Some stories aren't meant to be tied up with a neat little bow. They're not here to deliver certainty or close a chapter for good. Some stories are like wind through tall grass. Soft, fleeting, impossible to hold, but impossible to forget. They stay with us not because they shouted, but because they whispered something we didn't know we needed to hear. This one was never really about monsters or mysteries. It was about what happens when we listen to the quiet things. When we respect what we don't fully understand, about how sacred a place can be, not because it's marked on a map, but because of what it holds: memory, kindness, boundaries, protection, wounds, and sometimes, grace. Sometimes, the wildest things don't roar. They observe. They wait. And they only step forward when something pure calls them. Not fear, not attention, but something deeper. Vulnerability, honesty. A cry for help that doesn't even know it's asking. And when the answer comes, it might not look like what we expect. It might not speak our language, wear a name, or leave a trace we can show to the world. But if we're paying attention, if our hearts are soft enough to recognize it, well, no, because the real lesson lies not in proving something exists, but in understanding why it might choose to reveal itself at all. In a world that rushes past the sacred, that demands explanation for every shadow and label for every feeling, maybe the bravest thing we can do is pause. To stand still. To witness. To thank. To give without expecting a return. To protect what protects us, whether we see it or not. So maybe the question isn't, did this really happen? Maybe it's, what kind of world would we live in if we believed it could? If something in this story touched you, if it made you feel less alone, more human, or reminded you of a time when you felt watched over by something you couldn't name, let us know. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like to walk further down this trail with us, where the mysterious meets the meaningful, and stories aren't just told but felt, go ahead and subscribe. There's more waiting in the trees. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.